get started. One thing I ask, if anyone notices the camera, it's never happened before, but last time somebody kicked the power cord out of the wall. I think I know who too. I did that one some other time. But if you notice that thing going off during the lecture, let me know so I can get it fixed. We lost the last 30, 40 minutes of the lecture because it ran on battery. When we get into class, it only has an hour. That's the battery. So someone ran out at the beginning. I think that's what happened. It kicked the cord out of the wall and never recovered. So those guys will do all of my favor. I'm leaving town at 8:01 a.m. tomorrow morning, and so I'm going to be really pressed to get this video up until I get back. This one may not go up on Saturday. There's just nothing I can do about that. I'm sorry. I can't upload 17 gigs to the road. I have to be in my office. So I'll have to wait till I get back. I can't process enough tonight to get started, or I would. Okay, what else? On Thursday, you have a homework due. I need to have that turned in class at the beginning, not in the doors, not in mailboxes, unless you have a prior arrangement. One person has talked to me about that. But it's just too hard to keep track of it all. They come in multiple ways. I don't want them by email. Just want a nice pile of things to hand to the grader so he can grade them. Keeping track of everything, because I'm not using the Blackboard thing really. So keeping track of it all by email and all that's just too hard. So,
well, we get grid on one.
And we're going to draw it at random. So I'll just have, the GTF's going to come in right after you guys turn your homework in. He's going to go over it. He's going to go over some more practice problems. And if there's any time left, he's going to do some new material that I don't get to today. So that's the plan for Thursday, and then I'll be back on Tuesday. I'm not going to video Thursday. If he does new material, I'm going to go back over a little bit on Tuesday just to make sure we get my spin on it, and I know we're all on the same page. So I'll make sure to get anything new on the video eventually. So that's the plan for Thursday. Sorry, I got it. There we go. What else? Okay, I think that's something else. Yeah. So the question is, can you go over a good example of endogenous and exogenous? Can I do this first? And don't let me forget. Don't let me go into material without doing this, because I'm going to lift the board, draw a diagram, and I'll use a nice, easy supply and demand example to try to make this clear. All I want to do here is, last time we talked about the fact that, lights, camera, action. The MPC, we think, varies over the business cycle, and it used to be that I thought that during near full employment, when things were going well, people saved a lot, so you tended to see high savings in full employment. That is, the MPC tended to go down when things were good, partly because you think that wealthy people save more than poorer people, and as everyone's wealthier, you get more savings in the economy, and so the average MPC across the economy ought to be lower near full employment than it is in recessions, and then that has implications for the government spending multiplier. That means, oh, the government spending multiplier might be larger in recessions because it's 1 over 1 minus the MPC. That's something we learned last time. When the MPC gets larger, that multiplier gets larger. We were using 1 over 1 minus 0.8, and MPC of 0.8, you get a multiplier of 5. If you use 1 over 1 minus 0.9, a bigger MPC, you get a multiplier of 10. So as that MPC goes up, the multiplier goes up. Well, what we learned in this recession, or what I learned, maybe other people already knew it, I don't think so. It's kind of what, it was just kind of what we call a stylized fact that was true. But it turns out that in these balance sheet recessions, we say that because people's balance sheets got wiped out of this recession. They lost all their housing equity. So their asset values fell on their balance sheet. They lost a lot of stock market value. It's kind of coming back, but it isn't fully. And so the asset side of their balance sheet really took a dive. They lost their home and had to, or their home, they lost their job and had to start eating out of their savings. That brings that asset side down further. So what we saw people doing during the Great Recession was not increasing their MPC because they're struggling. We saw a lot of households doing what they call deleveraging. There's a lot of household deleveraging. This is from the Wall Street Journal last night, or today, I guess, since 2009. And so as the economy began recovering, we saw savings rates going way up and consumption going down quite a bit as people attempted to bring that asset side of their balance sheet back up and bring the liability side down, all the stuff they owe, because there was a lot of credit problems and that sort of thing too. So there was a lot of deleveraging in terms of the balance sheet and a lot of rebuilding the asset side. And that's a really time-consuming process. It takes a long time to sort of recover from a $100,000 hit on your house or a big loss in the stock market when you're just trying to save out a monthly income. You know, it took you many, many years to build up and suddenly it's gone and you got to do it again. And so as people were deleveraging, we saw a fairly slow recovery. Well, what's happening right now is it looks like that deleveraging may be coming to an end. People are starting to take on credit again, fall behind their bills, not saving as much. And so it's looking like finally that deleveraging process might be coming to an end. It's certainly not completely over, but it looks like it might be turning the corner a little bit and not as many people are doing it as before. That would be good news if it was true, because it would mean you're going to get more spending and less savings. That should generate the economy. When you all graduate, you might actually get a job. So anyway, just something related to stuff we've been talking about. It was in the news last night. Let me ask you a question. So the question is, can you give us an example of endogenous and exogenous? It's always defined relative to a model. So a variable that's exogenous in one model could be endogenous in another. And so it has to be relative to a model. Exogenous things are things that are determined outside the model. They're just given to the model, they're fed in as data. Endogenous things are the things that are determined within the model. So if you remember your old supply, oh great, we'll use a chop. Supply and demand model, you have quantity, price, some demand curve that might depend upon income. Y is income in this model. And some supply curve that might depend upon the value of wages. Now, what you do in this model is if I give it a particular W and a particular Y, it tells me what P and Q are. So P and Q are the endogenous variables. We give it the data. These are the exogenous variables, W0 and Y0. So that's the exogenous data over here. So we have these exogenous variables, W0 and Y0. You feed those into the model. In this case, the model is a supply and demand model. And what comes out are the endogenous variables, P and Q. Those are determined within the model. If I give it a different wage, if I increase income, if I change the data coming in, the model tells me what the new values of the endogenous variables ought to be. And so the exogenous stuff is just the data getting fed into the model. The endogenous stuff is what the model then calculates from the data.
Is it just always the dependent and independent variables?
Yeah, in some sense, yes. Not fully, because I could have an equation in my model that's y equals f of x, where the causality is going in that direction. Yet both of these could be determined someone else in the model endogenously. But basically, it's the same idea. So yeah, that's endogenous and exogenous. Now I could have another model where I make the wage come out of the labor demand, labor supply diagram. So now my model is these two things. Certainly I've got some other exogenous data that I've get this, it tells me W. So now W becomes part of what's determined by the model, and I have other pieces of data that I feed in. And so it's not that a variable is exogenous or endogenous when it's born. It's relative to the model that you're using.
And last question.
Mhm.
And can you go over one algebra question in last week?
I've got 2 more examples today.
No, like one, oh, two more examples?
Yes.
Oh, that's
So we're going to do a couple more examples of the algebra stuff later today. And then on Thursday, we're going to try to do some more. I said this last time, but I think I'm getting pretty committed to it. I'm probably just going to abandon the overheads because I find them just more distracting than anything else, and just do everything on the board. Maybe I should just start that today so my notes are on my computer. It's just, plus the camera doesn't work well, and it's just awkward, and just, those serve as your notes. You can get all the notes off the camera anyway, so those are more complete than anything I could possibly write in PowerPoint anyway. So it's a bit redundant in that sense. So I'm probably just going to abandon the stupid PowerPoints because it just isn't working. But for now, oh, this is pretty embarrassing. My first slide says go to the board. Well, this is lecture 3. That's on Thursday, I think. This is Tuesday, right? That's like Thursday. What day is it? Tuesday. So I need to explain the multiplier intuitively. So last time we started talking about the multiplier, so that was silly. So I'm just going to talk about the multiplier a little bit more and try to explain intuitively how it works and remind you about the circular flow diagram. And in the process, try to change the classes. They're like $11, I don't care. Okay. So last time we learned there was this equation that we could use if the change in y was equal to the multiplier 1 over 1 minus C1.
Yes.
That's just terrible. I wish they would just use M or NPC or something that tells you this is the marginal density to consume, times the change in autonomous spending. And that came from an equation that said y is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1. Help me out here. This was C0 plus G bar plus C0 plus G minus C1T. What else is there? Plus I? I bar. I mean, these are all exogenous. T is exogenous. That's just data. That's data. That's data. That's data. That's data. We feed the data in, we get the output. Does everyone have that right? Is that the same thing you have in your notes? Okay. So this was the autonomous or exogenous stuff. Those are 2 words for the same thing. And this is the endogenous variable that comes out. So this is the data. We've got this model that we've been using. Z, it's the weirdest thing for expenditures, and that gives us that Y. So Y is the endogenous variable in this model. So then we said we can always use this formula. For instance, suppose we're looking at G. Suppose G goes up by 100 or something like that. If we want to know the change in Y, we can say, well, the change in Y is 1 over 1 minus C1 times the change in G. So if this was 100 and this was 0.8, it would be 500. 1 over 1 minus 0.8 times 100 would be 500. So we can use this to calculate the change in output. And then what's supposed to be puzzling here is that we only changed spending by $100, but somehow income and production go up by 500. So how does that multiplier process work? And I just want to review, because not all of you probably remember it, how you can see this on what's called a circular flow diagram. Remember that thing? So you have households, right? Business. You put a government in here somewhere. A long time since I did this one. Help me out here. We've got the businesses here. So what happens is, and here's a cookie jar. No, I don't want to do it this way. And then we've got financial markets. Government right here. So households can save or they can consume, right? And then businesses send income to households. Now, part of that income goes where? Part of that income will go to the government as what? Taxes. So there's some government here. So part of this goes to the government as taxes, and what's left over here is disposable income that goes to the households. And they use that disposable income to consume. The government also spends money, so this is all demand, and the financial markets turn savings into investment. And so households consume, you add to it the business investment, you add to it that, and you get that C plus I plus G, consumption, investment, government spending, have equal income. And so in equilibrium, all those flows are equal. And so everything there balances out. So each period, income goes to households, part goes to the government, they consume, taxes come out of it, government spending goes back, they say, it turns into investment in financial markets, and this goes on and on each period.
So what you're saying is like production and income, right?
Yes. So right here you can see that y equals c plus I plus g. And that's what our equilibrium condition is b. So this is what we've been calling z, which is all of our spending. So y equals z. Now, what I want to imagine is suppose that $100 more goes into here. And that the MPC is 0.8, just like in here. So the MPC, that is C1, is 0.8. So if $100 came into here, that's $100 in new spending, which turns into $100 in new income. So the first thing that happens is we get the change in income for round one would be 100, right? Because we've spent more, income equals expenditures, so we get $100 new income. Part of that comes out of taxes, but this is a fixed number. So this goes up by 100. So what we're gonna see is household income is gonna go up the first round by 100. That's what we're saying over there. Now what happens to that income? 20 of it goes where? To savings. And what happens to consumption? It goes up by 80. Everything else, that's already happened. So now, as it comes around again, what's the change in Y for round 2? 80. And that 80 goes around, and what happens? 0.2 of it, 16, goes to saving, and then what happens to the rest of it? Consumption goes up by 64. So now the change in that expense on round 3, the change in Y is 64. That goes around 0.8 of that, 4096. Goes to consumption at 64 minus 4096, whatever that might be. Goes to, is that good at math? 48. Anyway, you see how it works. And so on. You can think of this as an apple. And it goes around, and savings takes a bite out of it. And it goes around, savings takes another bite, another bite, another bite. The apple keeps going around until it gets smaller, 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 and eventually disappears. What would this have to add up to then? What would the change in savings be when all is said and done? It's the whole apple, right? It's 100. What's the change in income going to be? If we kept doing this, we only did 3 rounds, we'd have to do an infinite number of rounds. So the total change in income would be what? 100 plus 80 plus 64, and so on, right? That's equal to 1 plus 0.8 plus 0.8 squared plus 0.8 cubed plus 0.8 fourth plus times 100. So I just factored 100 out of there. I did a few more terms because now I can do it easy. What's that 0.8? That's the MPC. Yeah. And this thing, remember what this is called? The power series, the geometric series. Remember how to add those up? You have A times 1 plus R squared, it's A over 1 minus R, as long as R is between 0 and 1 absolute value. Remember that? Anyway, if you do or not, you can use a math trick to say this is equal to 1 over 1 minus 0.8 times 100. So the change in Y has to be 1 over 1 minus 0.8 times 100. Well, what is this? That's 1 over 1 minus C1, and that was the change in G. So this is just adding up all those changes in income for the circular flow. So you inject $100, it gets spent. Part of it goes to savings and disappears. And 80 goes around, becomes income. Part of that gets saved, it goes around, part gets saved, it goes around, and we add up all total change in income. You got, it's services, there's no costs. So you go and you pay someone $100 to rub your back. They put $100 in their pocket, that's their income. They put 20 in savings, and they take that $80 and they go to someone else and have them rub their feet. There's no costs. That person takes his income, puts 16 in the bank, takes a 64 and goes to spend it somewhere else. That's someone's income. So it just keeps happening. When you add up all those changes. So that formula can be used too. It's just a summary of that process. Now it turns out there's two different ways to look at this equilibrium. They're sort of evident from this diagram. Equilibrium is when these two flows are exactly equal. So this equals this. Can you see that if we need all of these leakages to equal these injections? So these are called leakages from the circular flow. Savings and taxes are the leakages. These are the injections back in. If those weren't equal, there's no way these two flows could be equal. And so we can look at the equilibrium as either y, this says y equals c plus I plus g. That says that s plus t equals I plus g. These are just two different identical ways to state the equilibrium. I mean, they're not identical, but they give you the same y. So what I'm going to do next is show you that this can be derived from this very easily. And they're exactly the same equilibrium. This is called the savings equals investment approach. This is income equals expenditures. This is the way they first did it. This is more intuitive, I think. But this is the way they first built this model. It's the savings equals investment approach. So let's see if we can find an alternative way to express the equilibrium. Now, if you look at this top line, I think you can see that income goes to three places. So income comes in, partly it goes to taxes, partly it goes to savings, and partly it goes to consumption. So it must be that income is C plus S plus T. From the top line. Does that seem right? Think about where your own goes. You get Y minus T in your paycheck, you either consume it or save it. Now, but it's also true that Y equals C plus I plus G. That's what we know from down here. So it must be that C plus I plus G equals C plus S plus T, or canceling the C's, that I plus G equals S plus T. That the leakages from the circular flow have to equal the injection. I sort of like the leakages equals injections interpretation. The book uses a slightly different formulation. So then the book writes, I equals S plus T minus G. This is private savings. Right? That's how much private sector saves. If the government takes in 100 and spends 20, it's saving 80. Right now we have negative savings in the government, but the private sector more than offsets. So this is government savings. So we can say that either income equals expenditures, which is the way we've been doing it, or the other way we can say is that saving equals investment. Where this is a public and private. This isn't just S. This is both. So you can take the savings equals investment approach, or you can take an approach that says that income equals expenditures. And all again that's saying is that that has to equal that. And the only way that can happen is if what you take out is equal to what you put in. Now we can also derive a savings function. Everyone carries this extension cord around in their backpack. Very useful. All right. So now let's derive the savings function. So this was one topic, two different ways to look at equilibrium. Now we're going to go in and actually look at this savings equals investment approach a little more. To do that, I have to derive the savings function. So I know that y equals c plus s plus t. So it must be that savings equals y minus c minus t. What's the one here?
I'll use code actually.
All right. Temperature thingy is, maybe I turned it on something. Okay, we know that C equals C0 plus C1 times Y minus T. Remember that last time? So it must be that S equals Y minus C0 plus C1 times Y minus T minus T. And if you work that out, you'll get that S equals minus C0 plus 1 minus C1 times Y minus T. So that's the savings function. What's that 1 minus C1 term? Yeah. Yeah, it's the MPS, the marginal propensity to save. Remember what we said C0 was? One interpretation of C0? That's how much you would consume if your income was 0. How would you do that? By drawing down your savings. That's why it's negative. So we did our equilibrium initially by using this 45-degree line diagram. This was where y equals z. And we had this z equals c plus I plus g. Income was here, z was here, and this was the equilibrium. That's where y equals z, y equals c plus I plus g at that point. This gives us another way to get the same equilibrium. If I were to graph this thing, it's going to have a negative intercept and a positive slope. It might be relatively flat. C1's 0.9, this would be 0.1, but it has a positive slope. And so I could also graph the savings function, S, that's this thing. This is minus C0. And it has a slope of 1 minus C1. and I didn't really mean shoot. What's S has to equal at equilibrium? S was equal to, we had S plus T equals I plus G, right? So S would have to be equal to I plus G minus T. That would be a way to say the equilibrium, right? So if I just put another line on here, that's supposed to be a horizontal line. I plus G minus T. That's where, this is where Y equals Z, and this is where S equals I plus G minus T. It's the same equilibrium, which is two different diagrams. So this is the savings investment approach, income, or leakages, injections, however you want to do it. This is income equals expenditure, so identical. I really prefer this one. It's more intuitive, it's easier to look at. It's just an alternative way to look at it. Okay. One last thing. Let's show formally what I've been claiming to. They're exactly the same equilibrium. So let's take S plus T equals I plus G. We just said that S is minus C0 plus 1 minus C1 times Y minus T. Let's plug that in there and solve for Y and see what we get. So we have minus C0 plus 1 minus C1 times Y minus T equals I plus G. Oops, I forgot something. S plus T equals I plus G. If you solve this, you'll get Y equals 1 over 1 minus C1 times C0 plus I plus G minus C1T. Exactly the same equilibrium we got using Y equals Z. So this approach gives us the exact same mathematical formula that we got from Y equals Z. I just skipped some steps, but it works really does. Okay, one last point, and then I'll do a couple of examples of all this stuff. In this model, this is an obvious point, but I guess it's worth mentioning. We can figure out, say this is the 45-degree line, this is our current equilibrium. So we're at this point, y equals 1,000. And full employment is 1,500. And I know the MPC, that is C1, is 0.9. Then I'm sort of all powerful here. I can get there exactly. All I have to do is say, okay, look, I can use this formula that the change in y is 1 over 1 minus 0.9. That's 10 times the change in g. I want that to be 500. This is 10. So the change in g has to be 50. And so then we change g by 50, and in a matter of minutes, we're at full employment. In the real world, obviously, watch Congress try to change government spending or change taxes. It's going to take a long time, so it's not going to be so easy in the real world to just make these curves shift. It's also the case that we're not quite sure what this is right now. There's a big fight over potential output. Has it fallen because of the recession? Will we go back to where we were, with the trajectory we were before the recession? Or are we in a lower trajectory now? You know, what's potential output? So we don't know for sure what target we're shooting at. We don't know how long it's going to take for Congress. We may need 100. We may need 50, but they may say that's too much of a deficit or something and give us 45. And we can't even guarantee they'll get this number right. And we're holding all else equal. What if the MPC changes, or autonomous investment changes, or C0 changes, or something like that? That's going to complicate things further, especially if it's unanticipated. We didn't know it was going to happen. So we're making things very easy for ourselves. All else equal, no government problems, all those sorts of things. We know exactly what our target is. All of those problems in the real world are quite severe and much harder to deal with. So basically, you kind of try to move in the right direction and get close, but you're not going to hit it exactly. And maybe Congress doesn't get exactly at all. Expectations of the future could matter. The book talks about side effects, which are deficits. You might worry about the deficits, you can't do the policy. There's all sorts of things that go wrong in the real world to make this a lot harder. Okay, example. Let's say C be 500 plus 1/2 y minus t. So we're like China, we're saving half our income. I'm just making it up from here. I equals 400. G equals 200. Well, let's run a surplus just because we can. What's the equilibrium? Graph it. Find savings. Find consumption. So how do I find the equilibrium? Go to office hours. So define Y, C, S. What three formulae will I need? Define Y. Y is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1 times C0 plus I plus G minus C1T. That's all the exogenous variables and parameters. So y is equal to 1 over 1 minus 0.5 or 1/2 times 500 plus 400 plus 200 minus 1/2 of 300. So it's 2 times 950. So it's equal to did I get my math right? So this number is 1900. 45 degree line. Or we can do the other approach where we have savings. The other line, we have 1900 too. What's consumption? This is 1600. Oh, 1300. C is equal to 1300. 1300. What's I? What's G? Y equals C plus I plus G equals what? What's saving? There's a tricky, easy way to do it. You don't have to use the savings function. S is y minus c minus t. One way to get saving is to say S is minus C0 plus 1 minus C1 times y minus t. So it's minus 500 plus 1 minus 20, 1 minus half times 1600. 19 minus 3, so it's equal to 300. And then as a check, it's supposed to be that S plus T equals I plus G. Does that work? 300 plus 300 equals 400. That's the other equal. If taxes go up by 100, how much does income go up? Well, let's cut taxes. Taxes, so, oh, we're running a surplus. Can't have that. Taxes go up. He told me before. So taxes go down by 100. How much does income change? $200. Now in this case, you have to be a little bit careful. So what formula do we want to use? Change in y. 1 over 1 minus C1 times the change in autonomous spending. And this, though, let's be careful, this was C0 plus I plus G minus C1T. So if T goes down by 100, how much does autonomous spending change? By 50, because you have to take C1 times it. So it's minus C1 times the change in T in this case. It's minus a half times minus 100, which is 50. So spending goes up by 50. See, when you cut taxes, part goes to savings. And part goes to, if you think that circular flow, y minus t is coming in, and part of it goes off to savings, the rest goes to consumption. So spending only goes up by the MPC times the change in taxes. And so the change in A here, this would be 50. And what did I say, C1 was a half, so this would be 2, so income would go up to 2,000. It'd go up from 19, go up by 100 from 1,900. Two more. Should we break now or break after the next? Ryan?
It's real hot here. I think it's like upwards of 90 degrees.
Okay, so I'm not the only one?
No, it's hot here.
Okay, let's break. Try to figure that out. Everybody's gonna shut up.
Just feel how much colder it was. Oh, God.
몰라 이쪽 어딘가 안 내려갔어.
Okay, yes. Yes. right down. What's your name again? All right. Now I need to tell you that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's, that's the GDP. And then the percentage change in that. So what you want to do is take nominal real, get one number, nominal real, get another. And then the percentage change is the difference between the numbers. Okay. Send me an email or something.
This question, I was wondering
Yes. Think of this as the average tax rate.
average.
And it doesn't change.
But it doesn't change.
In the real world, it would. That's the business cycle. You get people one month brackets. And this is our model. But in our model, there's one bracket, one income, so don't worry about that. So T is just a fixed number. It's on, you can get there from the, yes. But if you just type in economics 313, you should be able to find the webpage. On here, all the homework, lectures, and videos, you can go back to what you missed, and then so you can also get to that blackboard up on the left, if you'll say class page. Yeah, it's on Thursday. Yeah, it's not too long. Yes. I also put a copy on the. All right. The lectures are there. Sorry, now I need a break. Econ is too hard to put on graphs and everything, so people end up insisting that all these type of these graphs and stuff are all Okay, one more example, then on this new material. We'll go to actually to a new chapter and something completely different. So I want to do one on what's called the balanced budget multiplier. So this is about the balanced budget. Boy, it's hard to write with these little fragments of chalk. Oh God, it's the biggest one. There's no more classroom music, you can steal from another classroom. So we're going to have C be 300 plus 0.75 times y minus t. I equals 200. G equals 400. And t equals 400. And we're going to imagine that we need to do something to help the economy, but we have some people in Congress who simply are not willing to run a deficit. They're opposed to that. And so what if we were to change government spending and taxes by the same amount? What if we say let the change in G to be 50 and the change in T to be 50? So that these will just go to 450 each. And we're still in balance. Now, you've probably seen this example before, so you may already know how it works. But you're supposed to think, oh no, how could that possibly work? We're giving with G and taking away with T. How could there be anything left over on net? How could this be stimulated? How could this stimulate the economy? And the answer is that this is a direct hit on C plus I plus G. So C plus I plus G would go up by 50 here. When we raise taxes, consumption doesn't go down by 50. Because part of that change will go to taxes. And part will go to, so we increase taxes, part will be paid by reducing savings, and part will be paid by reducing consumption. So the net impact on autonomous spending, G and T, will be positive. Just think about this formula that we've been using. So we know that y is 1 over 1 minus C1 times C0 plus I plus G minus C1 times T. Now, in this example, that number is 0.75. So when taxes go up by $1, consumption would go down by what? 75 cents, but savings would also go down by the other quarter. And so the impact, this is the impact on aggregate demand, is just the consumption part. So this is the change in consumption due to the change in taxes. When taxes go up, consumption only changes by 0.75, C1 of it. So we have that y equals C plus I plus G. G is going to go up and C is going to go down, but C isn't going to go down by as much as G goes up. So if we were to do, let's just do the change in G. So the change in Y is 1 over 1 minus C1 times the change in G. That's part of it. That's the change in Y due to G. And the change in Y due to T will be 1 over 1 minus C1 times minus C1 delta T. This is really the change in consumption from the change in taxes. That's what you can see here. When that goes up, this goes down by 0.75 per dollar. So we're capturing the net impact. I could just do change in G. I could just do this as change in G minus C1 delta T is one thing. I could add them up. So this one's going to be 1 over 1 minus 3/4, 0.75 times 50. 50 was a really bad choice of numbers. And this one's going to be 1 over 1 minus 3/4 times minus 3/4 of 50. Is it too late to make it 60? Are 5s easily turned into 6s, or should I just go with this? Then I get a nice round number here.
60.
Let's do 60. Is that okay? So I made 6 changes. Here and here, here and here. So I'm just going to move over here. So the change in Y to the G will be 4 times 60, 240. And the change in Y due to T will be 4 times minus 45. All right? Equals minus 180. So the total change in Y, which is the change in Y from G plus the change in Y from T, is equal to what? It's equal to 240 minus 180, so it's equal to 60. And it's no accident that that's exactly the same as those numbers. The balanced budget multiplier is 1, we said. I'll come to that in a second. So the overall impact, even though we didn't change the budget at all, we did change the size of government. They might object to that too. The government's now bigger than it used to be. That's why there were a lot of proposals during the crisis to do balanced budget multipliers to get over the objection to the deficit. But the second objection is then, well, you're making government bigger. And we don't like that either. And so that was a hurdle we couldn't get over. But theoretically, you can get the impact. So again, why do you get an impact on output even though G and T went up the same? G has a 1-to-1 impact on aggregate demand. When you increase taxes, it has a less than a 1-to-1 impact on aggregate demand, because part of it comes out of savings, which is not aggregate demand, and part of it comes out of consumption, which is. So if government spending goes up by $1, spending goes up by $1, because they're spending $1 more. That's just how it goes. If taxes go up by $1 and the MPC is a half, consumption only falls by 50 cents. So the net impact on aggregate demand is positive. The rest comes out of savings. You with me? So I could have just put this all into one thing. The change in Y is 1 over 1 minus C1 times the total change in expenditures. And so these two things are equal, and this is a fraction. So that's going to be a positive number. This is the MPC, between 0 and 1. These are equal, they're the same number. So we know that change in G equals change in T in this example. If they weren't the same, you could still use this, and they just wouldn't be the same. So I can also say that the change in Y is 1 over 1 minus C1 times, let me just plug that into here. Change in G minus C1 change in G, because they're the same. So the change in Y would be 1 minus C1 over 1 minus C1 times the change in G, because there's a 1 minus C1 I can factor out here. And it's going to cancel the other one. So you can say the change in Y is 1, that's the multiplier, times the change in G. Or the change in T, doesn't matter which one you use because they're the same. So we say the balanced budget multiplier is 1. The change in G over here was 60. Change in Y is exactly equal to either one of these. And there's the math that proves it. So the ordinary multiplier is probably bigger than 1, the balanced budget multiplier is equal.
So G has a 1-to-1 impact on aggregate demand, and taxes has a what?
Less than 1 to 1. That's what, because this is a fraction. So if these are the same number, it has to be an overall impact. And the reason it's a fraction, this is the change in consumption, part of it's paid out of. There's a 1 minus C1 delta T that comes out of savings. It's not as warm now, is it? That's strange. Evan is supposed to do another balanced budget multiplier example on Thursday to kind of refresh this and come at it from a different perspectives. I don't know if you've heard this term used during the Great Recession, but a lot of people are worried about what we call the paradox of thrift. Oops. There we go. All right, let's have C, 800. I might have gotten this one from the book, I'm not sure. There's a similar example in the book. Yeah. Been doing it a long time, and numbers like 0.9 and 2/3 don't work well with numbers like 100. And so I tend to use a half, 3/4. Where you run into trouble is that C1T term. So you need this times this to be a reasonable number. You use 2/3, and it's T is 50, you know, we got all these fractions. I'm just making it. In the real world, 0.8, 0.9, somewhere in that range is probably what this is. 0.8 is a good one too. It's easy to work with. I use that sometimes. So, what we're going to do in this example is we're going to have people do something that's supposed to be really good. They're going to save more. They're going to be virtuous. And what's going to happen is it's going to make everyone worse off, and savings isn't actually going to change. And that's the paradox of thrift, that an increase in the desire to save isn't necessarily a good thing. It can make us all worse off. So I want to try to show that. So let's first find equilibrium income. So y equals 1 over 1 minus 3/4 times C0 plus I plus G minus the MPC times T. Now you can see why it's 3/4. So this is 4 times 1900 minus 300. So it's 2400. Everyone think that's right? And let's find savings. So savings is minus C0 plus 1 minus the MPC times y minus t, 2400. We might get negative savings here. Minus 400. So this is y minus t, 1 minus c1 minus c0. So I think savings is minus 800. $2,000, right? Did I make a mistake?
2,400 is 64.
Oh, 4 times. Oh, that's good. This is 6,000. Yeah, 4 times 16 is 64. What was I doing? I did 6. I think it's 6. Yes, I didn't see the 1. I don't know. I can do that calculation, but really, I didn't. So we okay now? So savings is what? What's a fourth of that? Minus 800 plus 1/4 of 6,000 is 1,500. 1,500 equals 7. Now let's let people do something virtuous. They say, oh, I want to increase my savings. If I lower this to 700, what would happen if this had been only minus 700? Savings would be 800. So they're going to try to do that. So let C0 go down from 800 to 700 to try to increase S. That was 700, that only would have been minus 700. Presumably we get 800, but so what's going to happen? This number's going to change on us. So let's find a new equilibrium. Before it was 6,400. Change in y is 1 over 1 minus 3/4 times the change in C0 times minus 100. So y goes down by 400, right? All right? Yes. So the new output is equal to 6,000. And what's saving going to be now? S should be minus 700 plus 1 minus 3/4. What's income minus taxes now? $5,600. All right. And so that's equal to minus 700 plus 1/4 of 5,600, which is 1,400. One into that is, bring the one up is 416 here. It's 1,400. So minus 700 plus 1,400 is equal to 700. They tried to save more, but what happened? Nothing. And what happened to the economy? Instead of GDP being 6,400, it is 6,000, so there's less employment, less output. And so this virtuous thing is not so virtuous after all in this model. You end up not actually increasing your savings. The reason is when you save more, you consume less, that drives income down.
What did you do here with the change in y? I always told it.
So I just used that, the formula that says the change in y is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1. That's the change in autonomous spending. And this was C1 plus I plus G minus C0 minus C1T.
Yeah.
And it's just the change in that thing. So this is the change in C0,
Oh, okay.
which went down by 100.
Okay, you got, okay. And it came out at 6,000.
The new one, this is minus 400. We were at 6,400. It fell by 400, so now we're at 6,000. So savings is going to fall by a quarter of that. That's what happens here.
Since S plus T equals I plus G, you can give us 3 out of the 4 variables, you can just solve for S.
Yes.
By setting
Yes.
not go for the output. It's going to do this.
And so that's exactly right. Unless one of those variables change,
Yeah.
you're not going to
But
change
you're not
it.
going to be giving us all 3 variables. Because it'd be unnecessary to go through one.
No, I wouldn't. But I might have to do this later.
Okay.
Yeah, you can find it out. That's why that's useful. He's saying that, didn't we know this without going through all this? Because S plus T equals I plus G. So S must be I plus G minus T, and none of those changed. Yeah, that's right. And so savings couldn't have changed. We could have calculated savings this way. But that wouldn't have revealed the intuition about why. We tried to save more, and income fell, so our net savings didn't change.
How do you calculate the 5,600?
The new income is 6,000. Taxes are still 400. So Y minus T is 5,600. So this is just Y minus T. Mhm.
So, is that S, is that a new formula? The-
Here?
Below, one more below,
Yes.
up one more. So that one right there, yeah, so is that a new formula, the S zero? Because.
This is S.
Savings is, so it's negative 800, right?
Hmm?
It's negative 800 rather than positive 800 to find how much you're saving.
Well, it's minus 800 plus, savings could come out negative.
No,
Does
but,
it?
yeah, no, but I'm saying, why is it negative 800 in the equation?
Because when we first started, C0 was 800.
Okay, so S, then you have to do negative.
So if we have no income and consuming 800,
Got it,
we must be dissaving by 800.
got it.
So the only way you can consume 800 with zero income would be to draw down your savings by 800. So that's the interpretation of that minus 800.
That's all for me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's enough of that math stuff. So onward and hopefully upward. So the next chapter, we're going to move on to financial markets. So we're now to chapter 4, and it's on financial markets. And what we want to do now, we've been looking at one type of demand equals supply, income equals expenditures. The demand for goods equals the supply of goods, essentially what we're doing. Now we're going to look at money demand equals money supply. We're going to have to talk about what determines money demand, what determines money supply. Then we're going to have to put these two models together, because we're going to have an equilibrium in the money market, equilibrium in the goods market. They might not be consistent. So then we need to sort of integrate these things together into a bigger structure. We're going to bring these two markets together into this other diagram. They'll have sort of the money market and the goods market together, and we'll find the simultaneous equilibrium in both markets. That's called ISM3 or ISLM, depending on how you do it. And so very soon we'll be integrating all this. But for now, we're just going to do the demand for money. So what determines the demand for money? Remember? We could do all, this book doesn't do it, we could do all the stuff like why you hold money, transactions demand, speculative demand, remember that? Store of wealth function. All right. So we're going to assume that your wealth, that's not your income. Your wealth is the accumulation of all your past savings. So it's stocks and bonds and stamp collections and money in the bank that's just sitting in savings and that sort of stuff. Your income is the flow that comes in each month. You might save part of it, and your stock of wealth would go up. Or you might consume more than your income, and your stock, that's the dissavings. Your stock of wealth would go down. So what we were just talking about was wealth going up or down. And so we're going to assume that wealth is held in one of two ways. As either money or bonds. Now there's other ways to hold your wealth. We're mainly interested in financial wealth here. You can put it in old cars, you can put your wealth in all kinds of things. There's a more general formulation here. But we're just going to focus on these two assets. What distinguishes these is you can buy goods with these, this stuff, but it pays no interest. This pays interest, but you can't buy goods with it. So this way you can buy goods, there's no interest. I can't write this little thing. And this one, I can't write anyway, it's worse now. This one pays interest, but you can't go and take a T-bill in the 7-Eleven and buy gum. It's not recorded for you. And so what we need to figure out is how wealth is distributed between money and bonds. How much of your wealth you need to carry around as money for transactions, for precautionary purposes, maybe for speculative purposes. So you have some stock of money that you're holding, and the rest is in the market. So what's going to determine the part of that that's held as money? Once we know the money part, given your wealth, we can figure out what the bond part is. So I don't have to figure out, this is a number it's just, the wealth will be money plus bonds. And we're really mainly thinking about your financial wealth here, not your houses and that sort of stuff.
Ignoring all of that. Ignoring all of that.
Yeah. You could say plus physical wealth and so on, but this stuff is never going to do anything in our model. So we may as well just throw that out and just focus on this. So we know it's there, it's just not important for the kinds of issues we're going to talk about. So we'll just abstract from it and just talk about the financial part of wealth. There's another decision about how much to put in all those different kinds of assets. But we just want to get a distinction between, we just want two aggregates, one that doesn't pay interest and one that has a rate of return. But even if you put your money into old cars, presumably they appreciate over time, you can calculate the rate of return. P1 minus P0 over P0 is going to give you the interest rate that you got on that investment. And so, anyway, so that you can subsume into this as just another kind of interest-bearing asset. And we're just going to collect it into this aggregate we call bonds to make it easy. So that's what we have in mind here, is these two. So bonds is kind of just a placeholder. So basically, you should leave, I mean, think of it, if your savings pays a higher rate of interest than your checking account, so you can also think of this as two different rates. So say your checking account pays 0, even though that's not quite true, and your savings account pays something, or money market or something like that, does a little better. So what you should do is like leave all your money in savings. When you're standing in line at the grocery store, you know you're going to spend $11.99. Transfer that money over just in time to get your credit card, your card to the machine, so that you absolutely maximize your interest income. And so that might take a whole bunch of transactions each month. Right? And there's a cost to each one of those. And there's also a benefit, which is the interest that you earn by leaving it in there a little while longer. Probably for most of you, the interest that you're going to earn doesn't give you enough benefit for managing your money that closely. You should probably once or twice a month move, maybe just once at the beginning of the month, take things from saving and put it in checking. If the interest rate were higher back in the old days, when 10, 15%, people were much more careful, even students, about leaving it in accounts like money market funds. The opportunity cost of leaving it in checking was way higher. And so people would leave as much money as they could in some financial investment, and then as they needed it, as school came along, they'd pull that money out. Right now, when interest rates are so low, you're probably just dumping your money in wherever you want. You're not really worrying about it too much, because the benefit of that close monitoring isn't very high. But if the interest rate were 100% per day, you'd probably take that $100 in your wallet, drop it off at the bank, and pick up $200 on the way home. You know what I'm saying? And so one thing that probably determines this split is the interest rate. And it's probably the case that when the interest rate goes up, the amount of money that you hold goes down, and the amount of bonds that you hold think. Mostly. Corporations behave that way, they manage their money too, they hold money. Not always, right now with interest rates so low, it's not very sensitive. That has implications about some things, but we'll get to all that later. The other thing that might happen is, one reason you hold money is to buy goods and services, right? And we pay price times quantity at the checkout. So PY in aggregate is the amount of spending, right? If PY goes up, because either one of them goes up, you're probably going to want to hold more money in your pocket because you're going to spend more each month. You need to carry around more. You know, if you're spending $1,000 a month out of your pocket, you need more money in your pocket than if you're spending $100. And so we think then that money demand ought to depend on those two things. Maybe some more things too, but at least those two things. So what we can write, the way the book writes the demand for money, is to say, all right, if that's true, we're going to write the money demand function as PY times a function L of I. And this is a negative function. When I goes up, money demand goes down. L goes down. So this is PY times this function L of I. The reason why this isn't inside, most books do it this way. Let me try to explain. So what they're trying to say here is that hold the interest rate constant. If you double prices and hold Y and I constant, you probably need twice as much money because you have to spend twice as much. So prices double with Y constant. You're buying the same amount of bicycles, but they cost twice as much. You need twice as much money. Or hold price and I constant, hold the price constant, but buy twice as many. You probably need to carry around twice as much money. So this is multiplicative for that reason. It moves 1 to 1. It's homogeneous at degree 1. You know what that means. So if price doubles, if this doubles for any reason, money demand should double. You're spending twice as much, you carry around twice as much. When I goes up, money demand goes down. So we can show that graphically as follows. We'll put money demand on that axis, interest rate on this axis. And this is going to be PY L of I. That's money demand. Probably so. It probably does flatten out, but I don't want to explain it. Yes, it probably is correct. So this captures a negative relationship. If we have a low interest rate, MD0 and I0, we raise the interest rate, money demand falls. So negative, that's the LI part. And what happens if P or Y go up? We have this function, PY L of I. If PY goes up, what happens? I'll turn it on the right. Shift. Do the shift. because you can see it here. You have MD equals PY L of I. If I hold I constant, so let's just look right here. There's MD and there's I. Hold I constant and let PY go up. What happens to money demand? Goes up. So at the same interest rate, money demand would be higher. That has to be on the curve. So it must have shifted out. So if PY goes up, it shifts out. So to pick up a theme from the very beginning, if P and Y are exogenous and I is endogenous, how do we find I? I've got a demand curve. What am I missing? Supply curve. Yes. So for a given PY, if I had a supply curve on here, I could figure out what the equilibrium would be. So for now, very well until Tuesday, no banks. There's no checking accounts. Remember that the money supply is equal to currency plus checking accounts we call demand deposits. So these are checking accounts. This is what we call M1. This makes it a little bit harder. So for the moment, we're just going to have our money supply all be currency. So every bit of money supply will be currency. And the Fed will control the amount of currency perfectly. The only thing we have in the model is M, and M is all currency. So that makes it pretty easy, because now the money supply is just M. So in that same diagram, I and M, the money supply is just whatever they want it to be. Doesn't matter what the interest rate is, they control perfectly. However much currency they print, it's out there. So if you put a money demand curve on there, PY L of I, money demand curve, that intersection, we already know what M was because the Fed controls it, but that then gives us the equilibrium interest rate.
What does L mean usually?
It comes from Keynes, and it means liquidity preference. So he talked about liquidity preference rather than money demand. So you had illiquid assets like bonds and cars and houses, and like when I was sitting with my kids' school, we bought the lot next door, and then when it came time to pay for college, we tried to sell the lot, and no one wanted to buy it in 2 or 3 years. It wasn't a very smart way, or a very liquid way to store my wealth. And so liquidity preference, money was the most liquid of all assets. And so the interest rate determined your liquidity preference. You wouldn't want to be in the most liquid asset as the interest rate went up and start losing into these other types. And so for Keynes, it was the demand for liquidity. But we just call it money demand because it's less confusing. But we're stuck with Yale on all the textbooks for the last 50 years.
And so with wealth, so you talk about bonds, but what about different investments like stocks that don't have like a set rate of return, or rate of return could be negative potentially? Do we factor that into this model at all, or no? Or into wealth, I should say?
We can just think of that as another sort of interest-bearing asset and calculate the rate of return. When you add risk, though, it makes it a little bit different, and so it changes your liquidity preference.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what's going to happen is if the riskier bonds and stocks get, you're going to start pulling some of that more into M.
Okay. Got
So
it.
another thing that, in a more general model, I might write this,
Maybe I'm like more micro.
where this is the variance of financial asset prices or the amount of risk or something like that, and that'd be a positive function.
Okay. Got it.
So when the financial crisis hit, you saw money demand go way up because everyone was dumping out of financial assets and getting into money and other sorts of things because they were worried. And so, yeah, you can get that in your guide. Yeah, so what I was going to do, and I don't really have time, and I'm going to forget to do it on Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is talk about what happens if you increase the money supply or if you increase PY, that kind of thing, but maybe I'll have to. All right.